In the 2nd century of the Roman Empire, when the world seemed vast yet bound by iron chains of tradition and power, there arose a man whose name would echo through history like a thunderclap. His name was Marcion of Sinope. He was the son of a wealthy shipowner from the shores of the Black Sea, born into privilege and ease. Yet from an early age, his heart was restless. He was not content with wealth or commerce. He sought answers to questions that gnawed at the very roots of human belief. What kind of God rules this world? And can such a God truly be good? In the marketplaces and assemblies, Marcion listened to the stories of the Hebrew Scriptures. He heard of the God who commanded floods, who sent fire upon cities, who ordered armies to slaughter entire peoples. He heard of the plagues of Egypt, the walls of Jericho falling to divine wrath, the endless cycle of vengeance and retribution carried out in the name of the Lord. And something within him recoiled. Is this God truly good? He asked himself. How can love be reconciled with such destruction? How can holiness be found in the blood of innocents? The more he studied the ancient writings, the more troubled he became. For the God of the Old Testament appeared to him not as a father of compassion, but as a tyrant of fire and sword. This God was jealous, vengeful, partial, and cruel. And yet, side by side with these scriptures, Marcion read the words of Jesus of Nazareth in the newly emerging Christian texts. There he found a startling contrast. Jesus spoke of mercy. Jesus preached forgiveness. Jesus blessed the poor, the meek, the peacemakers. He told his followers to love their enemies, to forgive 70 times 7, to turn the other cheek. He declared that God was love. Marcion could not accept that these two pictures represented the same being. On one hand stood the God of Israel, a God of war and punishment. On the other stood the God of Christ, a God of tenderness and salvation. To him, they were not one, but two. And so Marcion reached a conclusion that shook the foundations of the early church. The God of the Old Testament was not the true God. He was a lower, flawed, and even evil deity whom Marcion called the demiurge, the maker of the material world, a world full of suffering, injustice, and death. The true God, revealed only by Christ, was higher, pure, unknown to the world until Jesus unveiled him. This true God was love itself, utterly unlike the cruel ruler of Israel. When Marcion brought this teaching to Rome, it was like a spark falling upon dry wood. Some listened with horror, others with fascination. In 144 CE, he presented his views to the Roman Christian community, even offering a vast sum of money from his family fortune to support the church if they would embrace his vision. But the bishops refused, condemning his doctrine as heresy. They returned his gold and cast him out. Marcion did not falter. With his wealth and conviction, he established his own communities. His followers, the Marcionites, spread across the empire like wildfire. For the first time in Christian history, an alternative Bible appeared. Marcion declared that the Hebrew Scriptures were not Christian texts at all, but the testimony of the false, evil God. He compiled his own canon, a shortened Gospel of Luke and 10 letters of Paul, stripped of what he believed were later corruptions. To him, Paul was the only true apostle, the one who understood that Christ came not to fulfill the law of the Old Testament, but to abolish it entirely. For many, Marcion's teaching was liberating. They had struggled to reconcile the harshness of the Hebrew God with the gentleness of Christ. Now they were free. The Old Testament was cast aside, and the God of love stood revealed in purity. But for others, Marcion's vision was terrifying. To declare the God of the Scriptures evil was blasphemy of the highest order. Church leaders rose against him, denouncing him in sermons, writing refutations, branding him an enemy of the faith. Yet the question Marcion raised would not vanish. Can the same God who orders genocide also be the God who teaches us to love our enemies? His critics argued that Marcion was blind, that he failed to see continuity between justice and mercy, between law and grace. But his followers whispered that perhaps he had uncovered a truth too dangerous to accept. They asked themselves, if the God of wrath is not the true God, then who rules this world? And who is it that Christ came to free us from? The Marcionite churches flourished for centuries. At their height, they rivaled even the Catholic Church in number and influence. From Rome to Syria, from Egypt to Asia Minor, believers gathered under Marcion's banner, convinced that the God of the Old Testament was indeed evil, and that the God of Christ alone was worthy of worship. Though the Church eventually suppressed them, burned their writings, and consigned their memory to the shadows, the ghost of Marcion never disappeared. His challenge still lingers, a haunting accusation whispered through the corridors of theology. Was he a heretic, blinded by arrogance? Or was he a prophet, daring enough to name the evil that others were too afraid to confront? The story of Marcion is not merely the story of a man, but of a question that refuses to die. What is evil, and can evil ever be found in the very image of God? Marcion's boldness came at a heavy price. He was cursed in the assemblies, mocked by the defenders of orthodoxy, and accused of splitting the faith in two. Yet he remained unshaken. He believed he had uncovered a cosmic truth, that the world we live in, with all its cruelty, famine, disease, and war, could not have been made by a perfect and loving God. Only an inferior dark power would create such a place. To Marcion, this explained the suffering that generations of humanity had endured. His vision was not merely intellectual, it was existential. For him, the evil God of the Old Testament was not some distant figure in an ancient book. This God still ruled the earth, binding men and women under the chains of law, fear, and guilt. Christ, in Marcion's eyes, had come as a stranger from a higher realm, to rescue souls from the tyranny of this false creator. Where others saw continuity between Judaism and Christianity, Marcion saw opposition, war between two gods, the God of justice twisted into cruelty and the God of love revealed through Christ. The more his enemies attacked him, the more his followers revered him. They called him courageous, a man who dared to stand before the most terrifying figure in history, the God of the Bible, and declare him evil. Even those who hated him could not ignore the force of his questions. They wrote against him, but in writing against him, they preserved his legacy, ensuring his name would be remembered long after his churches had vanished. Though centuries have passed since his death, Marcion's shadow lingers. Every time a reader stumbles upon the verses of wrath and wonders, how can this be the same God of love? The ghost of Marcion stirs again. Every time suffering and cruelty in the world make us question the goodness of the divine, Marcion's old cry can still be heard. Perhaps the God we worship is not the true God at all.